Hello everyone, today Biker with a Heart bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. We hope you enjoy listening.
The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat above the dimly lit diner, casting erratic shadows across the rain-slicked parking lot. It was just past midnight, in the forgotten outskirts of a sprawling city, where the hum of distant highways mingled with the patter of rain on metal roofs. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and grease, a sanctuary for the weary and the lost. In the corner booth, shrouded by the dim glow of a single overhead bulb, sat Elena, her fingers tracing the rim of an untouched cup. Her eyes, red-rimmed from tears she refused to let fall, stared at the empty space across from her. She was a widow now, her husband gone 6 months in a crash that the police called an accident, but she knew carried the weight of unpaid debts and shadowed threats. The booth felt like a cage, her black dress a shroud as whispers from the counter, rough voices of locals nursing their beers turned toward her, laced with pity and something darker, unspoken judgments about a woman left alone. The door swung open with a chime that cut through the murmur like a knife, but no one looked up at first. Then the rumble hit, a low, thunderous growl that vibrated the windows and sent ripples across the coffee surfaces. Headlights pierced the rain, illuminating the lot like spotlights on a stage. A sleek black motorcycle pulled up, its chrome gleaming under the storm's fury, engine purring to a halt with a final authoritative snarl. The rider dismounted, his leather jacket slick with water, broad shoulders cutting a silhouette against the storm. He was Alexander Kane, known in whispers as the biker billionaire, a man who'd clawed his way from the dust of orphaned streets to command an empire of tech startups hidden behind the roar of his Iron Viper's crew. Scars etched his knuckles, remnants of bar fights and boardroom betrayals. But his eyes held the quiet steel of someone who'd buried too many promises under the weight of success. He shook off the rain, boots thudding against the linoleum as he stepped inside, the door chime mocking the sudden silence. But he wasn't alone for long. From the shadows of the highway, headlights multiplied like a swarm, 50 luxury cars, their engines purring with entitlement, screeching to a halt in the diner's lot. Doors flew open, and out poured them, 50 rich women, dripping in designer silks and diamonds that caught the neon like stars. They were heiresses, socialites, executives from the glittering high-rises downtown, each one chasing Alexander with the fervor of a hunt. "Alex!" one called, her voice a silken command, heels clicking as she led the charge. "You can't just vanish like that, we had plans." They flooded the diner, perfumes clashing with the coffee haze, their laughter sharp and possessive, eyes devouring him like he was the prize they'd auctioned off in their world of champagne and contracts. Alexander didn't flinch. His gaze swept the room, ignoring the frenzy, landing instead on Eleanor in her corner booth. She looked up, startled, her breath catching as their eyes met, his steady, hers fractured by loss. The women closed in, a wave of manicured hands reaching for him, voices overlapping in a cacophony of invitations and demands. "Come back to the gala, Alex. You promised. We can make you forget that biker life." But he moved through them like smoke, sidestepping a hand on his arm, his voice low and final. Not tonight. The diner's patrons watched, wide-eyed, as the billionaire shrugged off fortunes for a path to the back. Eleanor's heart pounded. She'd heard the stories of the Vipers, the unbreakable code of loyalty that bound them, but this man, this stranger, saw her pain as if it were his own. He slid into the booth across from her, the vinyl creaking under his weight, the scent of rain and leather mingling with her faint perfume of lavender and sorrow. "You look like someone carrying a ghost," he said softly, his voice roughened by years of wind and war cries, yet laced with an unexpected gentleness. Elena blinked, wiping at her cheek where a tear had escaped. "And you look like trouble on 2 wheels. What do you want?" The women hovered at the edges, murmuring, one snapping a photo with her phone, But Alexander's presence was a wall, unyielding. Outside, thunder rolled, and in the distance the faint roar of more bikes echoed, his crew, sensing the call, riding in from the night. It started with a promise he'd nearly forgotten, one made in the smoke of a battlefield years ago to a brother-in-arms who'd married Elena's sister. "Watch over them if I'm gone," the man had whispered, blood staining his fatigues. Alexander had walked away from that life, building walls of wealth to drown the guilt. But fate had a way of revving back like an old engine. He'd seen her photo in a forgotten letter, the widow's eyes haunting him during board meetings in glass towers. Now, here she was, cornered by shadows of her husband's debts tied to corrupt developers who'd muscled into the small town, threatening her home, her peace. The women outside laughed, oblivious, but Alexander knew the real chase wasn't theirs. It was the ghosts pursuing him, demanding he honor what he'd sworn. Elena leaned forward, her voice a whisper. "They're saying my husband's crash wasn't clean. Some suit from the city. He wants the land we have left." Alexander's jaw tightened, fingers drumming the table like the rhythm of a revving motor. "I've danced with those suits. They buy loyalty, but it don't stick." He glanced out at the lot, where his vipers were assembling, leather-clad shadows pulling up on Harleys that growled in unison, a family forged in fire, not blood. The women scattered slightly, sensing the shift, their glamour paling against the raw power of the bikes. One viper, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, nodded from the door, his eyes scanning for threats. As the rain eased to a drizzle, Alexander extended a hand across the table, calloused palm up. "Ride with me, not forever, just long enough to settle this." Elena hesitated, the weight of her solitude cracking under his gaze. In that moment, the diner faded, the clatter of plates, the hum of voices, replaced by the promise of motion, of justice carved from the road. She placed her hand in his, small and trembling, and felt the first spark of something unbreakable. The billionaire who'd evaded empires chose her, not for glory, but for the quiet honor of keeping a vow. Outside, engines roared to life, a convoy forming under the breaking dawn, ready to chase down corruption with the unyielding force of chosen kin. The first light of morning painted the horizon in streaks of gold, glinting off chrome and resolve. Elena stepped out with him, the women's stares like daggers, but Alexander's arm around her was a shield. As they mounted his bike, the vipers encircled them, a thunderous honor guard against the gathering storm of lies and loss. This ride wouldn't just save a widow. It would redeem a man who'd hidden from his scars too long, proving that true wealth lay in the promises that outlasted the rain. The engine's roar swallowed the diner's fading murmurs as Alexander gunned the throttle, the Harley vibrating beneath them like a living beast awakened from slumber. Elena clung to his waist, her arms tentative at first, then tightening with the rush of wind whipping through her hair. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and charged, the scent of wet asphalt rising like a promise of fresh starts. Behind them, the vipers fell into formation, a phalanx of chrome and leather, their bikes thundering in unison, headlights slicing through the dawn like blades of light. The 50 rich women stood clustered in the lot, their designer dresses rumpled, faces a mix of fury and bewilderment as the convoy pulled away. One shouted after them, her voice lost in the growl, but Alexander didn't glance back. His focus was the road ahead, curving through the misty outskirts toward the shadowed hills where Elena's troubles festered. The highway stretched like a vein of blacktop, flanked by skeletal trees and the occasional flicker of neon from roadside motels. Elena's cheek pressed against his back, the leather of his jacket cool against her skin, carrying faint traces of engine oil and distant campfires. She'd never ridden like this, free, unmoored from the suffocating grief that had pinned her to that booth. But as the miles blurred, questions clawed at her. "Who are you, really?" she murmured into the wind, her words barely audible over the roar. Alexander's voice cut back, steady as the rhythm of the pistons. "Someone who owes a debt older than the scars on my hands." He didn't elaborate. Not yet. The road demanded silence, its curves a metaphor for the twists of fate that had brought them here. They veered off the main artery onto a narrower back road, gravel crunching under the tires as the Vipers tightened their circle. Marcus rode point, his grizzled beard whipping in the breeze, eyes scanning the rear view for tails. The billionaire's life wasn't just bikes and boardrooms. It was a web of loyalties woven from the ashes of war. Alexander had built his fortune on algorithms that predicted market crashes, but the real empire was the Iron Vipers, 50 souls he'd pulled from the gutters, veterans and outcasts bound by a code etched in blood and chrome. That forgotten promise to Elena's brother-in-law, Jake, had been sealed in a foxhole overseas, under a sky raining shrapnel. "If I don't make it, Alex, look after my girls," Jake had gasped, his hand crushing Alexander's in a final grip. Jake's sister was Elena's late husband, tying the knot tighter than fate intended. Alexander had buried the vow under layers of success, but seeing her photo in an old letter, sent anonymously, a nudge from the past, had cracked the facade. Up ahead, the hills rose like silent sentinels, dotted with sprawling estates that masked the rot beneath. Elena's home sat on a modest plot there, a weathered farmhouse passed down through generations, now eyed by developers from the city. Her husband's crash, tires slashed on a rain-slick curve, the car plunging into a ravine, had left her vulnerable, whispers of sabotage circling like vultures. The lead developer, Victor Hale, was a suit with a smile like polished steel, backed by politicians who'd traded honor for kickbacks. He'd sent goons to discuss terms, their visits marked by shattered windows and veiled threats. Elena had fought alone, law books her only weapon, but the system bent toward the powerful. As the bikes crested a rise, the farmhouse came into view, its porch light a lone beacon against the encroaching dusk, though morning still clung to the sky. Alexander slowed, signaling the crew to fan out. They dismounted in a cloud of dust, boots thudding on the earth that smelled of pine and turned soil. Elena slid off, legs unsteady, her black dress dusted with road grit. "This is it," she said, voice laced with defiance and fear. "They've been circling closer every week." Marcus approached, his massive frame casting a shadow, a nod of respect to Elena. "We've got your 6, ma'am. Vipers don't break formation." Alexander scanned the tree line, senses honed from years of riding through ambushes both literal and corporate. He could smell the corruption here, like oil seeping into clean water. Hale's men had been through, tire tracks fresh in the mud. Inside, the farmhouse was a relic of simpler times. Faded photos on the walls, Jake's old service medal in a glass case, the kitchen table scarred from family meals now eaten alone. Elena poured coffee, hands shaking slightly, the steam rising like ghosts. Alexander leaned against the counter, his presence filling the room without dominating it. "Tell me everything," he said, eyes locking on hers. She did, halting at first, then spilling like the rain earlier, the late-night calls, the forged documents claiming eminent domain under some vague Urban Renewal Act, the way Hale's lawyer had smirked in court, implying her resistance was futile. "They think I'm broken," she finished, tears brimming but unshed. Just a widow with nothing left. Alexander's fist clenched, knuckles whitening, but his voice remained even. "They mistake quiet for weakness. I've toppled bigger empires on less." He stepped closer, the air between them humming with unspoken alliance. Outside, the Vipers patrolled the perimeter, their low conversations a murmur of solidarity, stories swapped of battles won not with fists, but with unyielding truth. One, a former nurse named Lila, bandaged a Viper's old wound from a recent skirmish, her hands steady as she reminded them, "We ride for the forgotten, not the flashy." It was their creed, chosen family over bloodlines of convenience. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden shafts through the windows, a distant engine hum broke the peace. Black SUVs cresting the hill, Hale's enforcers arriving uninvited. Alexander's eyes narrowed, a predator's gleam. Time to remind them promises outlast threats. Elena stood taller, drawing strength from the man who'd chosen her corner over coronets. The Vipers mounted up, engines snarling to life, a wall of resolve against the incoming storm. This wasn't just about land. It was redemption's first mile, honor revving toward the heart of corruption. The chase had flipped. Now the billionaire and his widow would lead, with loyalty as their unbreakable shield. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The SUVs crested the hill like predators scenting blood, their tinted windows reflecting the midday sun in blinding flashes. Dust billowed in their wake, choking the air with the dry tang of disturbed earth. Alexander stood on the farmhouse porch, his silhouette framed by the creaking screen door, one hand resting on the railing worn smooth by generations of hands seeking solace. Elena hovered behind him, her breath shallow, fingers twisting the hem of her dress as if anchoring herself to the moment. The Vipers had fanned out across the yard, Marcus positioning his bike to block the drive, Lila and the others forming a loose perimeter, their postures a silent testament to battles fought in shadows, far from this quiet plot. Engines idled low, a rumbling undercurrent that vibrated through the ground like the Earth's own warning growl. The lead SUV braked hard, tires skidding on gravel, and doors slammed in unison. Out stepped Victor Hale, impeccably suited despite the rural grit, his silver hair slicked back, a briefcase swinging from one manicured hand. Flanking him were four men in dark jackets, their bulks suggesting more intimidation than actual threat, eyes hidden behind sunglasses that caught the light like shields. Hale's smile was a calculated curve, the kind that sealed deals in smoke-filled rooms. But it faltered slightly at the sight of the bikers. Leather vests emblazoned with the Viper insignia, a coiled serpent that promised strike without mercy. "Mrs. Ramirez," Hale called, his voice smooth as oiled leather, ignoring Alexander entirely. "We had an appointment. This circus isn't necessary." Elena stepped forward, chin lifted, the tremor in her voice masked by a steel she'd borrowed from the man beside her. "No appointment, Mr. Hale, just trespassers on my land." Alexander remained still, his gaze dissecting Hale like a blueprint of flaws. The subtle tick in the man's jaw, the way his enforcers shifted weight, hands hovering near concealed holsters. He'd seen this play before, in boardrooms where fortunes flipped on whispers, and on back roads where justice came at the end of a chain. The billionaire's empire wasn't built on brute force alone. It was algorithms and alliances. But here, with Elena's farmhouse at stake, it was the old code that surged, honor for the fallen, protection for the promised. Hale's laugh was a bark echoing off the hills. "Trespassers. This land's as good as city property under the Renewal Act. Your husband's debts sealed that fate months ago." He gestured to the briefcase, snapping it open to reveal stacks of papers, yellowed edges fluttering in the breeze. "Sign, and we walk away civilly. Resist, and, well, accidents happen." The implication hung heavy, laced with the ghost of that ravine plunge. Tires tampered under cover of night. Elena's face paled, memories flooding back, the screech of metal, the official report's cold finality. But Alexander's hand brushed hers, a fleeting anchor, warm against the chill of threat. Before she could respond, Marcus revved his engine, the Harley bellowing a challenge that drowned Hale's words. The enforcers tensed, one stepping forward with a growl, but Lila intercepted, her nurse's calm masking a veteran's edge. "Easy, boys, we're not here for blood, just truth." She nodded to a viper named Tyler, who dismounted and pulled a tablet from his saddlebag, its screen glowing with data streams that Alexander's tech had unearthed overnight. The crew had ridden hard after the diner, not just for muscle, but for the digital warren Alexander commanded from hidden servers. "We've got records," Tyler said, voice gravelly from years of shouting over rotors in desert skies. "Shell companies, bribes to councilmen. Your renewal act is a house of cards, Hale." Hale's composure cracked, eyes darting to his men as the Vipers closed ranks, bikes forming an impenetrable arc. Alexander finally spoke, his tone low, carrying the weight of engines and oaths. "You think wealth buys silence? I've buried deeper secrets than yours." He stepped off the porch, boots crunching gravel, closing the distance until Hale had to tilt his head up. The air thickened with the scent of pine and tension, the sun beating down like a spotlight on a duel. In that stare, Alexander saw the man's empire. High-rises piercing the skyline, built on land stolen from folks like Elena, promises broken for profit. It mirrored his own past, the way he'd clawed from poverty only to nearly lose his soul to the same greed. One enforcer lunged, a meaty fist swinging, but Marcus was faster, intercepting with a shoulder check that sent the man sprawling into the dirt. Dust exploding like a punctuation mark. No punches thrown, just presence, the Viper's code favoring de-escalation until the line was crossed. Hale backed toward his SUV, briefcase clutched like a shield, sweat beading on his brow. "This isn't over. The law's on my side." Alexander's laugh was quiet, almost pitying. "Law? You've twisted it like a bad weld, but promises, they hold." He turned to Elena, who watched with wide eyes, the fear ebbing into something fiercer, gratitude, perhaps the first bloom of trust since her loss. As Hale's convoy retreated down the hill, tires spinning futile gravel, the Vipers let out a low cheer, more relief than triumph. Elena exhaled, leaning against the porch rail, the farmhouse's shadow lengthening as noon tipped toward afternoon. "How did you know about the bribes?" she asked Alexander, her voice soft, searching his face for the man behind the myth. He glanced at the horizon, where storm clouds gathered anew, mirroring the unrest in his chest. "Jake taught me to dig deep. He was the one who saw through the lies back then." The name hung between them, a bridge to the past. Jake, her brother-in-law. The soldier whose final words had bound Alexander to this moment. She'd heard fragments from old letters, but now it clicked. The biker billionaire wasn't chasing glory. He was fulfilling a vow whispered in foxholes, one that had survived wars and wealth. Inside, as the crew settled on the porch with lukewarm coffee and shared stories, tales of rides that saved more than lives, of families forged in the roar of the road, Alexander and Elena sat apart, the kitchen's quiet enveloping them. Sunlight slanted through lace curtains, dusting moats like forgotten dreams. "I ran from this," he admitted, tracing a scar on his palm, a memento from that battlefield. "Built walls of money to forget. But seeing you, it revved something old." Elena reached across the table, her touch tentative, igniting a spark that warmed the room's chill. "And those women, the ones chasing you like a prize?" A shadow crossed his eyes, the socialite's world a glittering cage he'd escaped. Flash without fire. They want the billionaire, not the man. You remind me what's worth riding for. Outside, the Vipers tinkered with bikes, the clink of tools a rhythmic lullaby. But vigilance lingered, scouts reporting Hale's retreat to the city, likely plotting retaliation. Alexander knew this was just the first skirmish. Corruption like Hale's had roots deep as desert wells, tangled with politicians and false ledgers. Yet in Elena's gaze he saw redemption's gleam, not erasure of scars, but purpose in their lines. As evening crept in, painting the hills in bruised purples, he stood, offering his hand once more. "We finish this together. My crew, your fight, unbreakable. She nodded, the widow's isolation fracturing under loyalty's weight. The road ahead twisted toward the city's underbelly, where truths would clash like chrome on concrete. But for now, the farmhouse stood sentinel, a bastion of chosen bonds against the gathering night. The evening shadows stretched long across the farmhouse yard, turning the Viper's bikes into hulking silhouettes that guarded the perimeter like faithful hounds. Alexander paced the porch, the wooden boards creaking under his boots, each step echoing the restless churn in his gut. The air had cooled, carrying the sharp bite of pine sap and the faint, acrid whiff of exhaust from Hale's retreating SUVs. Elena watched him from the doorway, her arms crossed against the chill, the day's tension etching new lines around her eyes. Inside, the crew had dispersed into small clusters, some cleaning weapons that gleamed dully in the fading light, others poring over Tyler's tablet, cross-referencing digital trails that snaked through Hale's empire like hidden roots. Lila brewed more coffee, its rich aroma a small comfort amid the brewing storm, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd patched wounds in far worse places. Alexander stopped at the rail, gripping it until his knuckles paled, staring at the dirt road that wound toward the city lights twinkling on the horizon. "Hale won't slink away quiet," he said, voice low, threaded with the gravel of old regrets. "Men like him dig in deeper when cornered, call in favors, twist arms." Elena joined him, her shoulder brushing his, a tentative warmth in the cooling dusk. She'd changed into jeans and a worn jacket from her closet, shedding the widow's black for something practical, ready for the road ahead. "Then we go to them first," she replied, her tone steadier than she felt, drawing from the well of resolve he'd unknowingly refilled. The promise Jake had extracted from him all those years ago now felt like a living thing between them, binding not just duty, but a shared ache for what war and loss had stolen. Marcus approached from the yard, wiping grease from his hands on a rag, his broad face set in lines of quiet determination. Scouts spotted Hale's tail heading straight for the district offices, likely rallying his council puppets. The veteran clapped Alexander on the shoulder, a gesture heavy with the weight of foxhole brotherhood. "We ride at first light, hit 'em where it hurts, the paper trail." Alexander nodded, the plan crystallizing in his mind like a blueprint emerging from fog. His tech empire wasn't just gadgets and apps, it was a network of shadows, servers humming in undisclosed warehouses, feeding data to those who fought the good fight. But this wasn't a solo hack, it was a convoy charge, Vipers united in the creed that had pulled them from their own ruins, loyalty as armor, honor as the throttle. As night deepened, the farmhouse glowed from within, lanterns casting flickering patterns on the walls like memories dancing in the firelight. Elena led Alexander to the attic, a dusty haven of forgotten relics. Jake's old duffel bag, faded letters yellowed with time, a photo of him grinning in fatigues, arm around a younger Eleanor at a family barbecue. The air up here smelled of aged wood and mothballs, thick with the ghosts of laughter long silenced. She knelt by a trunk, pulling out a small tarnished medal, Jake's, awarded for valor in a skirmish that had nearly claimed them both. "He never talked about it," she whispered, holding it out to Alexander. "Said promises were heavier than any ribbon." His fingers closed around it, the metal cool against his palm, stirring the foxhole's echo. Jake's bloodied hand in his, the vow to protect the family left behind. Alexander's throat tightened. He'd buried that night under boardroom battles, but here it resurfaced, raw as fresh gravel under tires. Their eyes met in the dimness, the space between them shrinking until breaths mingled, heavy with unspoken understanding. "I failed him once," Alexander admitted, voice rough, the billionaire's polish cracking to reveal the scarred soldier beneath. "Came back, chased the shine of money to drown the noise. But you're the echo I couldn't outrun." Elena's hand covered his, the metal pressing into their joined palms, a spark jumping like an exposed wire. In that attic, amid the relics of loss, something shifted, not romance born of flash, but alliance forged in fire, the quiet pull of souls recognizing their match in the fight. Outside, the Viper's low voices drifted up, sharing tales around a small fire pit. A nurse's story of saving a comrade under fire, a mechanic's laugh over a midnight repair that kept the crew rolling through a blizzard. Chosen family, their bonds unyielding as the chrome they rode. Dawn broke with a vengeance, the sky bruising purple before yielding to gold, the first rays glinting off dew-kissed handlebars. The convoy assembled in the yard, 20 Vipers this time, the rest holding the farmhouse against reprisals. Engines coughing to life in a symphony of growls that shook the birds from the trees. Elena mounted behind Alexander, her arms wrapping his waist with newfound sureness, the vibration of the Harley traveling through her like a pulse. The road to the city twisted through valleys cloaked in mist, the scent of wildflowers mingling with hot metal as they accelerated. Billboards loomed, advertising Hale's developments, gleaming towers promising progress, built on the backs of the displaced. Alexander leaned into a curve, wind tearing at their clothes, his mind racing ahead to the confrontation. Not fists, but facts, the unassailable truth of exposed ledgers. The city sprawled before them like a concrete jungle, skyscrapers piercing the haze, traffic a snarl of horns and haste. They veered toward the district hall, a squat building of glass and stone that housed the corruption's heart. Hale's SUVs were already there, parked brazenly, but the Vipers pulled up in force, blocking the entrance with a wall of bikes that drew stares from passers-by. Security guards hovered, walkie-talkies crackling, but Alexander dismounted first, helmet tucked under his arm, Elena at his side. "We're here for the records," he announced to the lead guard, voice carrying like a revved engine. "Public access, unless Hale's bought that too." The man hesitated, eyes flicking to the leather-clad phalanx, then stepped aside. Inside, the air was sterile, buzzing with fluorescent hum and the shuffle of clerks. They demanded files on the Renewal Act, Tyler's tablet syncing in real time to cross-verify. But as Elena pored over documents, her face drained of color. A forged signature, dated after her husband's crash, sealing the land grab. This implicates the sheriff's office," she breathed, handing it to Alexander. His jaw set, the pieces locking. Hale hadn't acted alone. The crash, the threats, all threads in a web spun by local power. A clerk whispered warnings, eyes darting to a back office where voices argued. Hale's, sharp and demanding, the billionaire's blood heated not with rage, but the cold fire of justice. This was the ethical precipice where loyalty clashed with institutional lies and redemption demanded they push forward. As alarms blared softly, someone tipping off security, the Vipers tensed outside, Marcus barking orders to hold the line. Alexander pocketed a copied drive, Elena's hand in his, and they strode out into the sunlight, the convoy roaring to cover their exit. Hale emerged, face thunderous, flanked by uniforms, but the data was theirs now, a weapon sharper than any blade. The ride back thrummed with purpose, the city shrinking in their mirrors, but the real storm brewed. Retaliation from the entangled powers, testing the unbreakable chain of vows and kin. In Elena's grip, Alexander felt the weight lift slightly. This path, twisted as it was, led toward healing, honor's quiet roar drowning the echoes of the past. And now, if this chapter of revving justice and hidden vows grips you, smash that like button below. Your support fuels these tales to thunder on. The convoy thundered back through the valleys, the midday sun, now a relentless hammer beating down on the blacktop, turning the air into a shimmering haze that distorted the horizon. Alexander led the pack, his Harley slicing the wind like a knife through silk. Elena's arms locked around him with a grip born of defiance rather than fear. The drive from his pocket bumped against his thigh, a digital talisman loaded with the damning files, emails chaining Hale to the sheriff's office, falsified reports that painted the crash as more than misfortune. The scent of hot rubber and wild sage whipped past, mingling with the faint, lingering trace of Elena's lavender soap, a quiet reminder of the fragile life they were shielding. Behind them, the Vipers rode tight, engines harmonizing in a low growl that drowned out the distant city horns, their formation a rolling fortress against the backlash they all sensed brewing. As they crested the final hill toward the farmhouse, a low rumble, not bikes but something heavier, echoed from the tree line. Alexander signaled a slowdown, the crew fanning out instinctively, hands drifting to handlebars worn smooth by countless miles. Dust clouds erupted from side roads, and out rolled 3 unmarked trucks, their sides scarred with off-road abuse, Hale's enforcers upgraded from suits to rougher hands. They blocked the drive, doors kicking open to reveal a dozen men, armed with more than bravado, batons glinting, faces hardened by back-alley deals. At the center stood the sheriff himself, Harlan Reed, a barrel-chested figure in a starched uniform that strained at the seams, his badge catching the light like a false promise. Hale lounged against one truck, arms crossed, his polished demeanor cracked by a smirk that screamed, "Cornered animal." Elena tensed against Alexander's back, her breath hitching as the bikes came to a halt in a cloud of gravel. The Vipers dismounted in unison, a wall of leather and resolve, Marcus cracking his knuckles with a sound like distant thunder. Lila positioned herself near Elena, her nurse's eyes scanning for vulnerabilities, while Tyler clutched the tablet like a shield. The air thickened with the tang of diesel and sweat, the sun casting long shadows that stretched like accusations across the yard. "Stand down," Reed barked, his voice booming with the false authority of a man bought cheap. "This is official business. That woman's land is under seizure. Debts don't vanish with a sob story." Hale nodded, eyes flicking to Alexander with predatory glee. "You bikers think you can play hero? This ends now. Hand over the drive, and maybe we forget the trespass at City Hall." Alexander swung off his bike, boots hitting the earth with a thud that echoed his steady pulse. He faced them, unblinking, the wind tugging at his jacket like an old friend urging restraint. Elena slid down beside him, her hand finding his in a squeeze that spoke volumes, gratitude laced with the fire of someone reclaiming her fight. "Official," Alexander echoed, his tone low and edged with the rumble of engines long silenced in his soul, like the official report on her husband's crash, the one with tampered brakes you signed off on, Reed. The sheriff's face twitched, a flicker of unease betraying the corruption's underbelly. Tyler stepped forward, tablet raised, projecting holographic snippets onto the dusty air, blurry timestamps of payments from Hale's shell accounts to Reed's personal holdings, land deeds altered in the dead of night. The enforcers shifted, murmurs rippling through their ranks like cracks in a dam. One, a burly type with a scarred cheek, lunged toward Tyler, but Marcus intercepted, his massive frame a barrier of unyielding loyalty. "Not today," the veteran growled, voice steady as the foxholes they'd shared. No blows landed. It was presence that held the line, the Viper's code a silent vow against needless blood. Leela moved to Elena's side, whispering, "We've seen worse. Remember that dust up in the Badlands? Held together then? Old now." The crew's stories, swapped around campfires and chrome, wove their strength, outcast turned kin, each scar a testament to promises kept when the world turned cynical. Hale's smirk faded, sweat tracing his temple despite the heat. Lies, fabrications from a dropout with a grudge. But Reed's eyes darted, the weight of exposure pressing like an invisible chain. Alexander stepped closer, the group parting like mist before a storm, his gaze locking on the sheriff. "Jake Ramirez," Elena's brother-in-law, died pulling me from fire overseas. He made me swear to watch over his own. You twisted that legacy for a payoff." The name hung heavy, stirring Elena's breath, a bridge from battlefield dust to this dusty yard, where old oaths clashed with new betrayals. Reed's hand hovered near his holster, but the Viper's circle tightened, bikes idling as a backdrop of restrained power, headlights flickering like eyes in the glare. Elena broke the silence, her voice clear, cutting through the tension like dawnlight. "My husband's crash wasn't fate. It was you, both of you, clearing the way for Hale's greed. But promises like Alex's, they don't bend." She held up a crumpled photo from the attic, Jake's grin defiant, a visual anchor that humanized the data's cold facts. Reed's resolve crumbled, shoulders slumping as the enforcers exchanged uneasy glances, some backing toward the trucks. Hale snarled, "This'll cost you all." But his words rang hollow, the web unraveling under the glare of truth. As the trucks peeled away in a spray of dirt, tails between legs, the Vipers exhaled in a collective wave, the yard falling quiet save for the settling dust and the soft whir of cooling engines. Alexander turned to Elena, the drive safe in his pocket, her eyes shining with a mix of vindication and vulnerability. "It's not over," he said softly, thumb brushing her knuckles, the touch a spark in the fading heat. "But we've got the leverage now. Enough to bury them in their own lies." She nodded, leaning into him, the farmhouse looming behind like a reclaimed sentinel. Inside, as the crew gathered around the kitchen table, maps and screens unfolding plans for the final push. A public hearing where truths would roar louder than any engine. The air hummed with purpose. Lila bandaged a minor scrape from the standoff, her touch gentle, reminding them family chosen rides through the fire. Night fell gentle over the hills, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant chrome glints. Alexander and Elena sat on the porch steps, the medal from Jake's trunk passed between them, its weight a reminder that redemption wasn't a solo ride. The Viper's fire crackled nearby, laughter punctuating strategies. Bonds forged stronger in the crucible of the day. Hale and Reed would counter, but the billionaire's scars and the widow's resolve had aligned with unshakable loyalty. The road to justice twisted onward toward a climax where honor would throttle corruption into silence, proving that some promises outlived the darkest storms. The stars wheeled overhead like scattered chrome fragments, the night air crisp with the scent of cooling earth and lingering wood smoke from the Viper's fire pit. Alexander sat on the farmhouse steps, the worn wood digging into his back. Elena beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, a quiet anchor in the hush following the standoff. The drive burned in his pocket, its contents a loaded chamber, ready to fire at the public hearing come morning. Around the fire, the crew's voices wove low tales, Marcus recounting a desert patrol where loyalty turned the tide, Lila sharing how a stranger's vow had pulled her from despair's edge. Laughter punctuated the stories, a balm against the day's grit, but Alexander's mind raced ahead to the district hall, where Hale and Reed would muster their final defenses, lawyers with silver tongues, whispers to sway the crowd. Elena shifted, her knee brushing his, the faint warmth cutting through the chill. What if they bury it? All this proof, drowned in their noise. Her voice carried the widow's weariness, edged now with the steel of shared purpose. Alexander turned, his eyes catching the firelight. Scars on his knuckles silvered in the glow. They've built on sand, truth's the gravel that grinds them down. He pulled the medal from his pocket, Jake's, cool and heavy, placing it in her palm. The metal linked them to the past, to foxholes and family ties that war had frayed but never severed. In her gaze, he saw his own reflection, a man redeemed not by billions, but by honoring what fortune couldn't buy. dawn crept in reluctant, painting the hills in soft greys that hardened to gold as the convoy revved to life. 20 Vipers strong, bikes lined the drive like iron sentinels, engines humming with restrained thunder. Elena mounted behind Alexander, her arms encircling him with sureness born of the night's confessions. Whispers on the porch of losses shared, promises renewed under the stars. The road to the city unfurled, mist clinging to the valleys like veils lifted by the rising sun, the scent of dew-kissed pines whipping past. Tyler rode shotgun on data, tablets synced to Alexander's hidden network, broadcasting snippets to trusted allies, journalists from the underbelly press, veterans groups who'd felt the sting of corrupt land grabs. This wasn't a lone charge, it was a ripple turning to a wave, loyalty amplifying the roar. The district hall loomed mid-morning, its stone facade scarred by years of public reckonings, flags snapping in the breeze like defiant banners. A crowd had gathered, locals in faded denim, farmers with calloused hands, whispers of the bikers' arrival drawing curious stares. Hale's camp arrived in force. Sleek sedans, disgorging suits and supporters, Reed's deputies forming a loose cordon, their badges glinting with borrowed authority. The air buzzed with tension, thick as the coffee steam from nearby vendors, the crowd's murmur, a low rumble mirroring idling Harleys. Alexander parked front and center, the Vipers fanning out to claim space, their presence a visual vow, chosen kin standing unbowed. Inside, the hearing chamber echoed with footsteps on polished floors, wooden benches creaking under the weight of anticipation. Elena sat rigid beside Alexander, her hand in his under the table, fingers interlaced like twisted rebar. The panel, 3 council members, faces etched with the weariness of compromised deals, called order, gavel, cracking like a starter's pistol. Hale testified first, voice smooth as riverstone, painting Eleanor's land as a vital link in progress, debts a tragic footnote. Reed backed him, report in hand, the crash deemed mechanical failure, his eyes avoiding the room's scrutiny. Murmurs swelled, but the Vipers sat stone still, Marcus's gaze a steady drill on the sheriff, Lila's quiet nod to a nearby family reminding them of stakes beyond ledgers. Alexander rose when his turn came, the chamber falling silent as his boots thudded the aisle. He wasn't the billionaire in a tailored suit, leather jacket zipped, scars bared. He was the soldier keeping oath. "This ain't about progress," he began, voice carrying the gravel of roads and regrets. "It's about promises broken for profit." He nodded to Tyler, who projected the drive's revelations onto a screen, timelines linking Hale's bribes to Reed's signatures, the crash's tampered evidence time-stamped by anonymous sources Alexander's tech had verified. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a farmer standing to shout recognition of similar shakedowns. Elena followed, her testimony raw, nights of fear, the farmhouse's ghosts, Jake's legacy twisted by greed. "They took my husband," she said, voice steady, eyes locking on Reed, "but not my fight." Hale's lawyers objected, voices overlapping in a frantic buzz, but the panel leaned forward, one member's face paling at the data's clarity. Reed shifted, sweat beading, his deputies exchanging uneasy glances as locals murmured agreement. Outside, the Vipers held vigil, blocking a surge of Hale's hired agitators, Marcus's calm commands diffusing scuffles before they ignited. No fists flew. It was the weight of exposure that crumbled the facade, truths unveiled like chrome under polish. As the hearing adjourned for deliberation, Hale stormed out, face ashen, Reed trailing with hollow steps, their web shredded, investigations promised by the panel's stern nod. The convoy rode home under a sky clearing to blue, the sun warming the blacktop like approval. Cheers erupted from roadside watchers, fists raised in solidarity, the Viper's thunder a victory lap, tempered by quiet honor. At the farmhouse, Elena dismounted, legs steady now, turning to Alexander with eyes bright. unclouded by grief's full shadow. You kept it, the promise. For Jake, for me. He cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheek, the touch speaking volumes of redemption's quiet fire. We kept it, vipers, you, me, family, rides together. The crew gathered, slapping backs, Lila toasting with coffee mugs, stories already weaving this day into legend. As evening draped the hills, the panel's verdict arrived via courier. Land secured, charges pending against Hale and Reed. The Renewal Act's rot laid bare for reform. Elena's farmhouse stood whole, a beacon of reclaimed peace, while Alexander felt the scars lighten, not erased, but honored in purpose. The rich women, their chase a faded echo, paled against this. Loyalty's true wealth, promises outlasting storms. In the porch's glow, with Viper's fire crackling and Eleanor's hand in his, he knew the road forked onward, not to empires, but to bonds unbreakable, justice's engine purring eternal. If these tales of roaring redemption and steadfast vows have touched your soul, thank you for riding along. Hit that subscribe button and join the convoy. More stories await on the horizon.